So when we think, and this is kind of where we wrapped up last week, when we think about following the Sandler process, pretty simple. If I understand the why behind why somebody wants to buy, and that, Jess, I loved your line on, I knew I had him or her hooked. Because the pain, when the pain is evident, when it's there, we're usually going to start to see more wins. We're going to see those dominoes fall into our place and into our favor. And we have to make sure we are uncovering that pain. Then we want to understand their time, money, and willingness to invest in those areas, including resources. And if we get the green light there, then we talk to all the decision makers, and we talked about gaining access to decision makers last week. If we have all of that stuff, there literally might be a little bit of a strong word. There's logically no other things that can go wrong unless the prospect misled us or we didn't really complete one of these steps. Because when you think about all the things that can go wrong in sales, they're all addressed by the Sandler process in really steps 2, 3, 4, and 5. We've uncovered everything. We've had a deep dive. Allison, in your world, so it's a little bit different, the application. But if you're dealing with an opportunity in the 401k space, we've talked to the advisor about compensation. We've understood what the plan is willing to invest. We understand why they're wanting to make those moves. And we're in front of the right decision makers. The only thing that could happen is we close the deal. That leads us to fulfillment. It really is a logical process, which really leads to the next question. When you deliver a proposal, so I don't know, how many people deliver actual proposals here? Like they get a proposal. I know most people do.
Eventually, yeah.
Yeah, eventually there's some sort of document, final sign off on something. Jess, you probably have an agreement. I know Brian and Lewis, you guys have a pretty formal agreement that gets into place. In theory, when the prospect receives that, there should be no surprises. In other words, if you're writing a proposal for somebody or a statement of work, and you're putting that in front of them, everything that they see there should have already been covered in your conversations. And that typically is where some of the gaps can be identified. So for example, Jonathan, I'll pick on you for a second. And you don't have to unmute. It's nothing going to be rocket science. But if you're putting together a proposal or a quote, and Jonathan sells millions of items at 5 and 15 cents, and some are more expensive than that. But imagine a component is 25 cents. And if Jonathan's looking at the agreement that he's sending out, he should say, do they know that that's going to be 25 cents? And if the answer is yes, put it down. If the answer is, boy, we haven't talked about that, my suggestion might be hold off on putting that down. Because the fulfillment step is the delivery of the proposal or the statement of work or the contract. And in my observation and in Sandler's observation, there really should be no surprises when we deliver it. As a matter of fact, it should almost be a done deal when it gets delivered. And as we get kind of into level 2 of training, we'll talk more about that. Because in theory, we've talked about all of those things in the prior steps. And that's why we say we should have a relatively high close rate, because nobody should get a proposal that really has question marks surrounding it. Let me stop there for a second, because usually that, I won't say causes any confusion, but usually there's a few questions that come up about delivering that proposal, which is, we call it the fulfillment step, which is a terribly misleading term. Any questions, thoughts, clarification there?
I have a question.
Sure.
So would that be identifying what type of advisor that I am speaking with to gauge like their understanding of all of the fees, for an example. And making sure that, maybe the terminology I'm using, I'm not using jargon, but something to explain a process or what this fee costs, making sure that they understand it.
100%, Allison. And I
Okay,
think you would find, and Allison is in the 401k space, they do a lot of business. But we would find that in an ideal world, we are developing the proposal or the contract in concert with our prospect. So
yeah,
that jargon is taken out. There's no ambiguity when the proposal / fulfillment is delivered.
right, okay,
Terms are understood. I won't go into the weeds here, but I will lay it out. If in fact you have a gap, so I'm selling Jim something, it's $1,000. If I'm writing that proposal and I go, and I challenge myself, I try, and I want you guys to challenge yourself, and this is why Andy and I are available for these types of conversations. If I said, how is Jim gonna react to that $1,000? And my response is, he doesn't know that it's $1,000. I will not deliver that proposal, or if I do, I will leave that element blank. And Jim will in all likelihood say, the investment, the price, the cost is blank. And I would say, hey, Jim, thanks for bringing that up. I left it blank because you and I haven't had an opportunity to have that conversation. Let's do that now. That was my mistake. I didn't follow my process, which says we should have already had this conversation. That's why I left it blank, so that we can develop that investment together. I know that that may sound corny. By the way, who thinks that sounds a little bit corny? Jess, you weren't supposed to agree. I'm just teasing. It does sound corny. I will tell you that it works. We will get better outcomes with that. Because if I'm guessing at the investment, what I could do is scare Jim off. And I'm not true to my process. So it's Sandler, I'm always going to eat my own dog food and follow the process. But if I don't have something that's agreed on before that's going into that proposal, he's probably going to get either an empty or no proposal delivered at all.
question again, sorry.
Sure.
Is it best to, like in the example that you just gave, wait for them to acknowledge the blank, that's not filled in? Or is it best, like right out the gate, for me to take, hey, I left these blank and we're going to go over, I didn't go over this with you? Is it?
Yeah, Allison, I'll speak from experience.
Yeah.
My response to that is your read on the situation. If
Okay.
I'm delivering a proposal to Rachel, or I do something called a straw man, and I can get more into the weeds later date. But let's imagine I deliver something to Rachel, and my read is we're going to review the deliverables, and we really haven't even had that price conversation. Then I will not bring it up until I get to that moment in time and say, hey, Rachel, you're going to notice I left that line blank. If in fact I maybe dropped the ball, I really probably should have done this. That's my read of the situation. I'm going to go, Rachel, before we get into this document, I want to point out that I did not put an investment in here. Because again, I didn't follow my process, and you and I have not had that conversation. It's a total read on the situation. Yeah, great question. I'm overkilling the fulfillment step because it is it's misleading in the term that fulfillment sounds like I'm delivering the goods. I'm delivering the solution, the clips, the buckles, the garbage containers. That's not what fulfillment is. Fulfillment is delivery of the proposal or the solution or the statement of work. And it's a great moment to backfill and say, did I get all this stuff right that Sandler has been leading, or laying out for me through this process? Any other thoughts or questions here? And I'll move us on.
David, I was saying, if it is that we forgot to do something and then did the fulfillment, for instance, the budget in this case, would it be better to instead of saying that I left out the budget, is it better to say, let us have another meeting, or we can still send out that fulfillment and then afterwards have another discussion? But wouldn't it defeat the purpose of all of that you're saying?
Yeah, Simone, it's a great question if I understand it. I'm selling to Jim. I'm going to use you. You're at a good angle for me right now, so you don't have to unmute. But I said to Jim, we wrapped up a meeting, and we've agreed that the next meeting I'm going to deliver a proposal to Jim. By the way, which step? What do I need to make sure I have with Jim on the board when I say we're going to deliver the proposal next Tuesday? What do I need to make sure I've got with Jim? One of the 7 steps. What I got to make sure I got with Jim.
Could be a couple things, couldn't it be? Like budget, knowing everyone who is going to be in that decision process, like the upfront
Sure.
contracts.
We're going to have all that stuff, but Jim was giving us the answer with fingers.
Where's
Jim with the fingers. Oh, and we got to make sure we got budget, but what do we got to have on the calendar?
The meeting, the upfront contract.
The upfront contract. We do only do. I'm going to be Dave Trapani rule. Sandler has 52 rules now. Dave Trapani makes up his own rules as we go along. Every meeting has to have an upfront contract. I'm delivering a proposal to Jim. It is on the calendar. Jim knows we're getting a proposal, or he's getting a proposal. He knows we're reviewing it, and we have agreed on what decisions will be made at the conclusion of that meeting. Usually it's just a very simple yes or no. There could be other decisions being made, but everything goes on the calendar because the last thing I want is Jim ghosting me. And Allison, all the other pieces go in there. Simone, back to your question. What happens? I just made an agreement with Jim. Next Tuesday, I'm delivering the proposal. We have an agreement for 11 a.m., 30-minute meeting. We're going to review the proposal. And at that point, Jim, we've already met 3 or 4 times. We know at the conclusion of that meeting, it's either going to be Trapani, I'm not doing business with you, or it's a go and we're going to start signing and getting things rolling. What happens if I've identified that I missed something? Can I call an audible and add another meeting in there? What do you think?
I mean, why wouldn't you?
Yeah, because here's why, Jonathan, because we have something called a brain, and it creates something called head trash, and it says, oh my God, I told Jim I'm getting him a proposal, and now I'm going, I can't deliver it. And then we get pressure. There's no rule that says I can't add an additional meeting. Prakash.
Just to repeat what you told Allison, it depends. You have to you kind of play it by the ear depending on the client, on your read of the client.
Yeah, and maybe I pivot at the beginning of the meeting, or maybe I say, hey, Jim, I dropped the ball here. Let's schedule another meeting. I don't have your investment down. We haven't spoken to your spouse or the CEO, whatever it is. There's no rule that says, as Jonathan said, why wouldn't you? Because usually our brain gets in the way and says, I'm going to piss Jim off and he's going to disappear on me. If Jim really wants to do business, he's not disappearing either way. Doesn't make a difference. Great questions. All right. I'm going to get us back. Any other questions? Let me just slide that over and go to here. So we set up an upfront contract, we're delivering the proposal, and now we're going to go into something that we call the post-sale step. So let's go just into the basic Sandler terms of post-sale. So post-sale means 3 things. I'll do it in text. Let's see if I do this right. Post-sale means 3 things. Eliminate buyer's remorse. Number 2, expand the relationship. Number 3, gain referrals. That's ultimately what the Sandler post-sale step means. And we're going to dig into this a little bit more in a few moments. At the end of the deal, Jim has decided to come on board. He's agreed to everything. But, and this probably hasn't happened to anybody here, but you probably have heard this happen to other salespeople where they thought they had a piece of business. They thought the agreement was signed. And 3 or 4 days later, they got a phone call and somebody said, I changed my mind. Does anybody know a salesperson that's had that happen to them? Prakash knows somebody. Prakash, you would be the only one here. Rachel, never happens, right? Are you telling me the truth or are you? Do I need to post-sell this? It happens pretty frequently. So what I'm doing is, let's imagine during the sales process, Jim and I were selling to each other, and Jim and I agreed on it's going to be $1,000 to do whatever it is we're delivering for him. But during the sales process, he said he only had $600 to invest. And he's agreed to go to the $1,000 mark based upon everything we identified. I'm going to bring that back up to Jim. Hey, Jim, when we originally started talking, you wanted to invest $600. Now it's $1,000. And I know you're on board. I know you're ready to roll forward. Let me ask you a question. In a couple of days, or even later tonight after you sign the agreement, are you going to have any regrets on making the $1,000 investment? And Jim says, Jim, you have to unmute. Are you going to have any regrets about that $1,000, Jim?
Yes.
You are. If Jim, by the way, why do you pick the wrong answer? If he says yes, what do I need to do? What do you think I need to do at that point?
Kind of start over and go back to the pain.
I go back to the pain. Hey, Jim, awesome. What's holding you back there? We originally talked about we were going to fix these 2 or 3 items. Let's make sure we have it right. And I just work myself back through the process. Once again, attitude comes up. Most salespeople, once the deal is closed, they hustle off the phone. They hustle out of the Zoom room or the prospect's office or somebody's home, and they head back to the office as quickly as possible to get it processed and hope that Jim doesn't pick up the phone and call back. We're actually going to challenge Jim on his decision. Takes a little bit of guts, right? Jim, were you going to say something?
Well, I knew one guy who had a little trick. This is when I was working in a store. If he was afraid they were going to go back and talk to the people down the street, after they signed the invoice, he would give them a quart of ice cream as a gift.
That's a pretty good, by the way, that would keep me on board, no doubt.
Yeah, because I got to get home before it melts.
There you didn't think of that. I just thought the ice cream would be great. That would smooth me over. It's a great idea.
Give them a gallon on the big sales.
Yeah, the big deals, you get a gallon and a bucket of sprinkles. So that's number 1, eliminate buyer's remorse. Now that could be, I heard something during the sales process. That could also be things that potentially go wrong or things that you might expect to go wrong. Hey, Jim, are you sure that we're good to move forward? We may want to challenge Jim. In addition, we may want to set up that next upfront contract. Hey, Jim, let's get our calendars for next Wednesday at 2 so that we can get the ball rolling here. Let's get that locked in upfront contract. And now we've got a little bit of post-sell going on by simply using an upfront contract to get the engagement started. That's step number 1. I'm going to come back to that in a moment. Anybody have any questions? Jump in, Prakash.
Yes. So Robert Cialdini mentioned something called commitment and consistency. So if we kind of, say if the eliminating buyer's remorse is saying, are you committed to this? Are you committed to this? And in so many different ways. So then they are kind of, I would say, shamed into being consistent. Would that work?
Yeah, so I'm not familiar with his take on this element. So that's interesting. I'll go back and look at it. but I don't want to shame him. And I do want to challenge him in a very positive way. So it might just be, word choice there, Prakash, but that's ultimately what I'm doing. Let's take that one step further. Let's hang here on eliminating buyer's remorse. And we are going to bring this back into the entire selling process. So everybody has a friend, a family member, significant other that is late or sometimes bails out on events. In other words, you're going to a concert. It's 6 o'clock this Saturday, and that individual is somebody that you invited. So Rachel, get that person in there, I saw you go, yeah, I know somebody like that. It's not you, is it? All right, so don't say the person's name because we are being recorded, but you have that person, right? What do you say to that individual to make sure that they show up on Saturday at 6?
That the tickets are already paid for and that it would be a huge waste of their money, my money. That's a big one.
Tickets are already paid for. Allison, what do you tell this person who bails on you or shows up late for things? Is it you?
Should have known better. No, just kidding. I don't, that was my mistake. I don't know.
Hey, what is it? Is it my mistake that I invited you? Anybody else have something that they say to these individuals when they're setting up dates?
We give an earlier time.
Earlier time.
Be there at 5.
Be there at 5. Anybody else? We are all post-selling in our real lives. I mean, that's exactly what is, so Prakash, to your point about shaming, in human community, in maybe personal communication, we might be a little bit more heavy-handed here, but in the sales environment, we're going to be a little bit more nurturing potentially, but we're going to test those waters. So that's ultimately what the eliminating buyer's remorse is doing, and you're all doing it in your personal lives. We know that. Let's talk about expanding the relationship. Jess, I'm going to pick on you for 1 second. You just signed a great deal. I'm not going to talk about the one from this week. I'm just saying in general, with a contractor who has tons of work going on in the Philadelphia area. And they're going to give you a little bit of a trial. And they're going to say, okay, we'll let you do 5 dumpsters a week at this site and just keep them moving. But they've got 50 other dumpsters going on in other projects. By the way, I'm completely making up the dumpster story, if you can't tell. But Jess knows that. So now that they've agreed to do this piece of business, Jess is setting up how to expand that relationship. So imagine Simone, you're the contractor. She's going, hey, Simone, let's schedule some time to review how we're doing. Let's schedule some time to make sure that we're delivering and meeting all of your expectations. And let's talk about what it would take for me to gain more of your business. We are setting that tone. I'll be literal at the conclusion of the sale. Brian and Lewis, you're doing a cleanup. You got a massive cleanup, but you know that there's going to be construction rebuild. You're teeing up the construction at the time of the cleanup. So it becomes a natural piece of add-on business. When you do it at the conclusion of the sale, Prakash, you signed up child number 1. They have 3 other kids in the family. Hey, if it works for number 1, let's make sure we're staying in touch, reviewing this so that we can bring the other kids into the mix. Allison, advisor gives you 1 piece of business. How do we get more? Jonathan, you're dealing with North Face. I know that I work on these jackets. How do I get into the sweatshirt group or the other apparel group? When we set this up at the conclusion of the sale, by the way, they're not buying anything from you there. So when Jess says, hey, can we schedule a call in 10 days, 2 weeks to review how we're doing? Not sure how the phone ended up back in here, but it's always spinning. Jess is doing that now when there's no pressure, there's no decision to be made. They most of the time, if not all of the time, say, yes, we'll schedule that meeting. And then the last element is it's a great time to say, hey, Lewis, listen, At some point, you're gonna say something nice about us. You're gonna love it. Would love to get some introductions from you. Not today, but at some point in the future, when we get back together, upfront contract, you're gonna be on my calendar to review how we're doing. Would love to talk to you about making some introductions on my behalf. Yes, Jess.
Dave, so one of my struggles is like my sale is actually really simple and my service is fairly simple. Right. So I have a hard time locking people in for meetings, or let's put something on your calendar, right? I'm selling to contractors who like their schedules are all over the place. They're never in the office. They're all over. So like I feel like it's important to set these times, like to schedule this, but that's hard to do for my customer base, or maybe I'm just making excuses.
Nope.
Do you have recommendations? Like, should I keep pushing for that, or should I just say, okay, we'll touch base 2 weeks from now. I'll give you a call 2 weeks from now.
Jess, it's a great question, and I'm just trying to maneuver some stuff around here. I'm not doing very well at it, but just give me 30 seconds, well, maybe more than 30 seconds. That's exactly where I want to go. And let's get that question answered today and then build on that, because it's exactly what post-sale is about. So before we jump there, does anybody have any questions about these 3 elements right here? The eliminate buyer's remorse, expand the relationship, or gain referrals? All right, I'm going to just make this a little bit bigger. And then Jess has a great question. By the way, Jess gave us the answer, potentially half of the answer on how we're going to address it. Who sometimes, there's nobody here that would argue, hey, I want to keep people on the calendar. Dave, that's a no-brainer. I want people on my calendar. You've told us 17,000 times in the few weeks that I've known you to keep people on the calendar. But inevitably, we know it's not as easy as I make it sound. And we've got to get people on the calendar. And we all work in some different industries. People are busy. People have a million things going on. So here's the direction I want to bring this. We talk about post-sale as step number 7. And this is why I say, don't worry about the numbers and don't worry about the order. Post-sale is a technique that we should be using all the time. And your examples of what you do with your family or friends is probably the best example. So let's go to Jess. Jess is working with contractors. They have a million things going on. By the way, I don't want to speak about contractors, but I'm sure, just like all of us, there's a selection or a subset in there that are really not organized. And there's probably a group that's super organized. And maybe a group that's even super busy that things change on a dime. So as we're setting up meetings, and Jim, again, I'm going to just pick on you for a second. Jim, can you play along for a second? And push back on me for a moment here, okay? Push back on me for a moment. I'm going to play the role of Jess. So, hey, Jim, I know you, Jim, what I'd like to do is you're going to use the 5 dumpsters that we picked up by next Wednesday. Can you and I schedule some time for next Thursday? Less than 20 minutes to review how it went and maybe talk about other opportunities. Would that work for you?
I'm gonna be a little busy that day.
You're going to be a little bit busy that day.
Yeah.
Now, okay, so hang on right there for 1 second. Now I can work off of his objection, but I'm going to take something that Jess said, and Jess, I wouldn't have done it if you didn't say it, but Jess knows that they're busy. She knows it. So I lead with that understanding. And this is going to sound really basic, but super effective. Take the objection away. Hey, Jim, I know you've got a million things going on, projects, your calendar is probably swamped. Part of our process is to do a review of how things went. When would be a good time for you next Thursday to get 20 minutes on the calendar?
Maybe 10 o'clock, I could do it.
All right. Thank you for being the role player. He did awesome. So Jess, my first element of post-sale is to take your exact words. I know you're busy. I know you have a million things going on. If you hear objections in your selling process, for example, Jonathan, your stuff is really expensive. A little element, a little tactic of post-sale, tell the prospect before they even bring it up. Hey, Jonathan, sometimes prospects think that we're a little bit expensive with our components. Tell them before it happens. It takes away one of their daggers to sink you. So that's one element. Jess, is that helpful? And you guys know this better than I, you know your business. Brian and Lewis, you're working with homeowners. Hey, you may not be home. Your husband or your wife may not be home. When's the best time to get you both here? Tell them before they tell you. It will eliminate what we would call buyer's remorse or eliminate some of those objections. That's one element. Now, here's the other one. Jim, agree to take the appointment with me this time, okay?
Okay.
Hey, Jim, we're gonna check on the dumpsters, blah, blah, blah. How's next Thursday at 10 o'clock for you?
That's fine.
Here's post cell number 2. Hey, Jim, I know you run a big construction organization here. Things are changing. Is there anything that's gonna get in the way of our appointment next Thursday at 10?
Well, unless something comes up, I may be getting a phone call earlier that day that might go long.
Okay. Well, now, since you've already got the phone call set up, would it make sense to pick a better time maybe for you?
Yeah, we can do that if you want to. You got time on Friday?
Yeah, that may be better. And I know, listen, things are going to come up, but let's find a spot where you feel like you're pretty secure in that time. Okay.
Yeah.
So I just post-sold an appointment with Jim, and he just modified it for me. He just gave me a better date for him. So I'm using this tactic of post-sell to secure that meeting down. Anybody have any questions? All right. One last thing, and then I do want to do some breakouts here. I know I'm doing a lot of talking. I want to do some role play. I want to give one other element. In many of our businesses, there is something that the prospect owes us. Maybe it's some data, maybe it's some historical information, maybe it's some schematics or diagrams, whatever it is. They owe you something. Jess, can you play along with me for a second? You guys just happen to be in the top row today, right? So Jess, you're gonna pretend that you owe me some data, okay? So Jess, you'll be able to send me the data.
Yeah, I mean, I could probably pull it together at some point.
When do you think you could have that data to me?
Probably 2 weeks from now, Dave.
Two weeks. Okay. Would it make sense? So if we did 2 weeks, today's Tuesday, that would be April, May 2nd. You think May 2nd makes sense for you?
Sure.
There's my first post out. Okay, May 2nd makes sense. Can I make a suggestion, Jess?
Sure.
Since you're going to send it to me on the 2nd, can we grab, if you could help me out, maybe 30 minutes on Wednesday the 3rd? When I get the data on the Tuesday, I can review it. Thursday, you and I can go over it. Just make sure it's everything we're looking for to proceed. If there's any gaps, we could have that conversation. Could be a 2-minute quick conversation, maybe a little bit more detailed if we see any gaps. Does that make sense for you?
Makes sense, Dave.
So what I've done is I've done 2 elements of post. Well, actually 3. One is I've gotten her to commit when she's sending it. When she said she was going to send it, I said, are you sure that that day works? And then I set up a upfront contract for the next day to review it. I am consistently, and I'm asking my clients consistently to follow that process. I'm not trying to put heat on Jess, but what I'm trying to do is lock her down so that if she needs to get out of it, I give her the opportunity. You know what, Dave? May 2nd, we got a lot of stuff going on that week. Maybe we should push it to the back end of the week. No problem. What I want to walk away with is that upfront contract, which locks in what's going to happen. All right. Questions or am I losing anybody here? It sounds relatively basic, right? I don't think there's any rocket science here. There's no rocket science. Questions or thoughts? Yep, Prakash.
So one of the things I used to do was teaching time management. You know that, Dave.
Yep.
And one of the problems, one of the people that I used to work with, he was working at the what's it called, the operations department of a software company. And anytime there's a some system failure, he's the person on point person. And so anytime we wanted to have a meeting with him, it would always be subject to that. And one of the things we developed was this concept of moving time window, which says that we have a tentative meeting for this time. But if something happens, let's keep the same time window, but shift it slightly, because it depends on his availability. So will that kind of thing help with setting up meetings?
Well, let's build that out a little bit further, Prakash, because I think it's a brilliant tactic in the world of sales. And for folks that have a shorter sales cycle, maybe the applicability is not there, but with bigger deals and maybe a longer sales cycle, you do want to follow a concept of, hey, and Prakash, I'll probably mess it up a little bit, but every week, every 2 weeks, you and I will have a standing meeting. And it may be only 5 minutes or 10 minutes, but it's a place to check in, to make sure that things are going well, and to consistently have a forum for if something were to go crooked, we can very quickly regroup. It is a great sales tactic. And if your business has a need for that, Allison, there could be some fits there for you guys in the shorter term, moving a deal forward. Jonathan, long sales cycle, right? And some deals, great tactic to advance deals forward. Great tactic. Always keep them on your calendar. While we call that the upfront contract stands as a post-sale technique that we can use, and that's ultimately what Prakash just laid out.
It's something that I've just noticed with the post-sale, whenever it is in the process, like you're always saying why the meeting is occurring. Like there's no secrecy, like it's just very transparent, and making them feel like they're not special, but this is how our process works, or this is what we do.
And Allison, that is the word choice that I suggest everybody build in. This is how we do it. This is our process. We are the experts here. You do what you do all the time. Your prospects only buy your product or service at various times. You are the expert in the room. And that's why I brought back in the BAT stuff, the attitude piece. You know better than your prospects. We're on an equal business stature level. And by putting these upfront contracts on the calendar, which is the post-sales, it's a post-sale tactic, we start to gain equal business stature. More importantly, we actually start to control the selling process and get better outcomes. So let's go back one step for a second. Jonathan, I'm going to put you on the spot. Is that okay?
Well, we'll see.
We're going to find out in 10. Jonathan's like, I'm not sure what you're doing. Jonathan, you're going to schedule an appointment with me and you're going to post-sell it.
Oh, geez. Okay.
Go. You're scheduling the appointment with me. I'm your prospect.
Dave, how's Thursday at 2 o'clock look for you?
Thursday at 2. I mean, I got a couple of things going on, but 2 o'clock should work.
Yeah, just typically 10, 15 minutes. I don't want to take up a bunch of your time. Does that work for you?
That should work. Yeah, 2 o'clock to roughly 2:15.
Yep.
Yeah,
And
sounds good.
I'll send a meeting invite over. And yeah, on that call, I just want to, review, make sure we're all set with the proposal, and also just find out if there's any other opportunities or issues that you're maybe having that we could solve for you.
I like that, actually. That sounds good,
Okay.
Jonathan.
Okay, great. I'll send over a meeting invite to get that confirmed and we'll talk then.
Awesome. I'm gonna give you a couple of things, by the way, all positive. This is all positive. So remember, I'm setting the appointment, and if I say to Jim, hey, Jim, next Thursday at 11, and Jim sounds a little wishy-washy, hey, Jim, you sure that that works? I go there. Jonathan, I'm gonna say unknowingly did two little post-sale tactics there. Number one, I'll send you the meeting invite. Send it while you're on the phone. John, I'm gonna send you the meeting invite. I'll send it right now when we're on the phone. If you could accept that, check the box. If it's accepted and it's on their calendar, higher likelihood they show up. As a matter of fact, I can forward that and say, hey, Jonathan, would you mind sending me the invite? Guaranteed to be on their calendar. His second post sale, he gave me an agenda. I agreed to it. That's a better out. We now know what we're talking about. There's the upfront contract rearing its head, solidifying the need to have that conversation. Make sense? So Jonathan gives me two little mini post-sale steps right there. Anybody else want to take a practice? Any volunteers?
David, not a practice, but just a question. You said
We're
that
trying to run the clock out, Simone. I know what you're doing.
this was an example of post sale, but it was a bit confused because it was an example of upfront contract. So I didn't understand it.
The upfront contract serves as a tie-in. It really ties down the post-sale step. The further he gets into that upfront contract, the more locked and loaded, and I'll call it eliminate buyer's remorse, the more locked and loaded that meeting became. And that's what it is. The upfront contract can serve as a bit of a post-sale step or tactic to get a better outcome. And that's what Jonathan did. We're going to put it on the calendar. Here's what we're going to talk about. He could have gone even deeper into that upfront contract, Simone, and that upfront contract would actually have a little bit of an equal sign to post-sale in eliminating my remorse from showing up to the meeting. Does that help clarify it a bit?
It does.
I'm understanding correctly too. I mean, I'm understanding with the upfront contract, we use that just about every time we're going to be meeting again. Is that correct? That's correct.
It's the freaking glue, Jim. You got it. The better we are at upfront contracts, the better outcomes we have. Here's the challenge with upfront contracts. Whoop, if I can drag this back in. We struggle. We forget to do them, number one. Number two, had a great conversation with Simone. I don't want to throw an upfront contract in. Head trash gets in the way. Lock and load it. Because the prospect appreciates the upfront contract. We sometimes think it's an annoying sales tactic. It's not. It creates a better outcome. By the way, when the prospect is not agreeing to your upfront contract, what might that be a sign of?
Just not maybe interested or not enough pain to really continue.
Yeah.
You know, they're kind of maybe being polite with you. They're like, oh yeah, sure, but not really that interested.
Bingo. And if I ask for the, by the way, not saying it about you guys, but in general, salespeople, you know what? I didn't feel like doing it because I might hear the answer that I don't want to hear. And that's what we're trying to move away from. I'd rather have the prospect not time management. I'd rather not have the prospect on my calendar and not show up. Then I don't know if I'm getting that right. I think you know what I'm saying. I'd rather not put someone on my calendar if they're not going to show up. I'll get my language correct. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of effort and energy. So we've got to be comfortable back to square one that no is okay.